Okay, I guess we can start. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all in this pre-Christmas meeting which we have. So our speaker today is Josep-Maria Arauzo-Carod from Universitat Rovira e Virgili, who will present the joint work with Eva Cole-Martinez and Elisenda Hovayopis. So, floor is yours. Good luck and thank you for being our speaker today.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I will try to explain this paper, which is something preliminary. It's a joint paper, as you said, with Eva Coll from Sciences Po Toulouse and Elisenda Jouvet from Universitat de Barcelona. And the idea about, or the motivation about this paper is the potentiality of circular economy measures and the drivers and barriers that they may face at regional level. And in order to understand that, let me show the difference. Let me show you the difference between a linear economy framework and a circular economy framework. The linear economy framework is the traditional one, the standard one, in which we extract, we produce, we consume, and we throw away at the end. And this kind of linear system implies taking, irrespective of the geographical origin, whatever inputs are required to make new products. And this is a process that generates a lot of waste, considerable amount of waste. In contrast, circular systems, they may look similar because they extract, they produce, and they consume. But then after this consumption stage, we can reuse, we can recycle, and we can start the cycle again by extracting back in smaller quantities. If you look at both, if we look at both systems, it seems that, or it could seem that, well, that the circular economy one is much more efficient, is much more better, is much more appropriate, taking into account the several environmental concerns. And then we may ask why not to go circular and why not to implement on a general way these kind of systems. But the problem is that implementation of circular economy actions is quite complex because that involves a lot of agents and a lot of policy instruments. So it's not easy to implement this kind of activities. And this is especially true according to current scenario, current system of globalization. Globalization that we may consider that since the 80s, we have a lot of manufacturing activities being offshored from Europe, but not only from Europe, also from the US, Canada, from Australia to many other countries. On the beginning, from Europe to the Central Europe to the Eastern European countries, and then later on to some Asian countries like in China, in Vietnam, in Malaysia. And all these huge offshoring movements have been decided, have been implemented without considering, without taking into account all the huge environmental effects in terms of increasing pollution. And this is something that, well, it's really a huge problem because most of this, or one significant part of these offshoring decisions have been taken trying to avoid environmental regulations in European countries. So moving from countries or geographical areas where environmental regulations were quite strict to other areas where environmental regulations were, let's say, less stringent, like in China, for instance. That obviously has a lot of effects in terms of transportation, in terms of pollution, in terms of a huge increase in the use of fossil fuels. And this is something which there is no a match between these globalization strategies and circular economy, because according to this globalization strategy, what do we have is that global value chains are absolutely dispersed around the world. So we have that activities that originally were carried out in a single place now are being disconnected to many different countries, even to many different continents. Uh, it is also true, and we have also to be aware of that, that similarly to these offshoring processes, we have in very recent years some backshoring activities, let's say some activities that originally were offshore, but that some years later partially are being partially backshored. Let's say they have gone back to the same areas or close to the same areas, but by now, backshoring activities are, let's say, are a very small fraction of offshoring one. So we have that if we compare the dimension of offshoring, this is something that is much more important than this than backshoring activities. So considering that let's say, these negative externalities linked to offshoring and these negative externalities linked to current geographical organization of production activities, it seems that, well, a circular economy could be not the solution to all these environmental problems, because it's not going to be the solution, the final solution, but could be at least part of the solution. For several reasons. Firstly, because it implies a more realistic consumption patterns, because, well, according to circular economy principles, we assume that current consumption levels are not longer sustainable. So even assuming that we have, let's say, an improvement in transportation systems, in technical improvements in terms of produce more, polluting less, it's not possible to keep our current consumption levels from an environmental point of view. But in the same at the same time, it's not clear how to implement all the principles of circular economy, which are mainly reuse, remake, recycle, inside current framework of offshoring strategies, because we cannot do that if we have production dispersed in very different locations. And that's why if we, let's say, go back in terms of this spatial fragmentation of economic activities, we consider that the implementation of circular economy principles would be much easier if we have, let's say, all these value chains, obviously not everything in the same place, but closer than, at least compared to current distribution of these value chains. It is true as well that circular economy is becoming more and more popular because it's more efficient and more sustainable than current linear model of take, make, and dispose. But at the same time, what do we know is that the evidence in terms of implementation of circularity, at least in the European Union, is very small. So we have very small evidence about firms implementing circular economy measures. And this is like this because, well, it's not straightforward to implement circularity because we require a lot of time to transform carbon structures, to redesign this geographical distribution of economic activities. It makes no sense to try to achieve sustainable goals by recycling if wastes and intermediate inputs are traveling very long distance. So we have to try to concentrate all these different stages of economic activities compared to, let's say, standard patterns of the current globalization system. But it's also important in order to improve, to increase circular economy actions, we also need to understand which the drivers and barriers are. Because if we don't know what increases or what generates some barriers, it's very difficult to improve circularity. And in this sense, we may discuss whether there is a spatial dimension when we talk about circular economy, and for sure the answer is yes. There is a clear spatial dimension that we think that it's mainly regional. Because as I said before, this idea of reusing, remaking, and recycling implies or needs a close spatial connection among all these production stages. So that's why circular economy principles or the implementation of circular economy activities also requires this geographical connection. So then proximity is needed, geographical proximity. And obviously geographical proximity implies coordination, and coordination implies and requires a common governance. And that's why we consider that regions must play an important role in circular economy. Not only regions have to play a role, but in any case, the one of region should be important according to these characteristics of regional of a circular economy actions. Also considering that and considering that this the implementation of the circular economy actions implies a lot of connections among firms and among industries. I should say that it's important to take into account, to consider, to know, to analyze current regional heterogeneities in some characteristics like industry specialization, like skill level of workers, like R&D activities, because all of these activities must be coordinated at regional level in order to boost the efficiency of circular economy measures. And that's why we consider that circular economy should be, let's say, policy decisions regarding circular economy should be tailored at regional level, because we have to better, let's say, organize different activities carried out by different firms. For instance, typical examples of circular economy measures are the ones in which wastes of some industries are used as inputs of other industries. But in order to achieve that, we need some coordination in order to, let's say, to move this waste from some industries to other ones which are going to use them as inputs. We need the infrastructures in order to facilitate these movements. We need also the logistics of that, and we need also some technical specifications in order to allow these wastes to be used as inputs in other areas. And this is why we consider that we claim that circular economy measures need this kind of coordination, and that this kind of coordination could be supplied by regional authorities. And this is why we are trying to understand these drivers and barriers of circular economy actions according to some characteristics that we are going to measure at a circular level. If we have a look on the literature about circular economy and the identification of previous drivers and barriers by different empirical papers, there are some of them that have identified as drivers. For instance, technological knowledge, organizational knowledge, because it's important to have the technology in order to implement this kind of transformations in production structures. But also it's important to achieve social engagement, because without this social engagement, if if circular economy is not a priority for public policies, it's very difficult to achieve this goal. So we need the social engagement. We don't need as well a favorable regulatory framework. We need funding opportunities because to implement this kind of measures is not for free, it's expensive. And also we need, it's important to have some economic opportunities, as there are some business opportunities in this design of this general structure that may favor circularity. And at the same time, we have some barriers like higher production costs because it's more expensive to produce in that way, at least in the short term, not in the long term. Barriers in terms of demand uncertainty, because obviously we have to generate new markets, and also a very important barrier is that of lack of government support. So according to that, we have identified several research gaps in this sense. The first gap is about the current limited understanding of factors explaining circular economy initiatives, so factors acting as drivers and factors acting as a barrier. So this is the first gap that we try, at least partially, to counterbalance with this paper. The second one is that we need some papers that try to identify which are the optimal conditions in order to maximize these drivers, and also on the other side to minimize these barriers. And this is especially important taking into account that in terms of empirical contributions about that, there is a huge scarcity at regional level. So there are only few papers trying to do that at regional level. And we need, of course, additional empirical evidence in this sense. So according to that, well, the objective of this paper is very obvious. So what do we try to do here is to try to understand what facilitates or hinders firms in European regions, because we use an European approach, what facilitates or hinders firms in European regions from engaging in circular economy activities. As for the originalities or the contributions of this paper, we may, let's say, identify two of them. The first one is about that if we have a look on carrying empirical contributions, most of research is about countries, and this is something which is needed because national dimension matters a lot, because take into account that circular economy policies are designed at the European Union level, but then these policies have to be implemented at national level. So all these European regulations have to be adapted at national level. So national economy, national dimension clearly matters, and is quite important. But this kind of aggregated approaches at national level, so they provide a very broad overview. And this is one of the, let's say, standard contributions we can identify in this literature. On the other side, what do we have are very detailed firm case studies. And these are fine. These kind of papers are needed because this is the only way to really understand all this transformation in the business model, in the production processes that you need to implement in order to go circular. But the problem about these case studies is that they are very specific to certain industry sectors or even products. So it's very difficult to get a general idea of the implications of and the difficulties of the implementation of circular economy measures. So what we are suggesting here is something in between, something not very aggregated like those national papers, but neither something which is very specific like this firm case study, and that's why we are studying we are working here at regional level for 208 European regions. This is the first contribution. The second contribution in this paper is that we distinguish 9 types of circular economy practices because, and we group them into 3 strategies: reduce, recycle, and redesign. And we do that because normally when we think about, when we read something about circular economy, most of people identify, okay, circular economy is something like we recycle. But circular economy is much more than that. And that's why we have a very detailed data set identifying these 9 types of measures, but in trying to simplify them and to trying to have, let's say, a broad approach, we group them into 3 groups: to reduce, activities that aim to reduce, activities that aim to recycle, and activities that aim to redesign. And then in addition to these 3 types of activities, we also consider a single measure of circularity. As for the data set, here we are using our circular economy activities are being obtained from the Flash Eurobarometer on small and medium enterprises, resource efficiency, and green markets. This is a survey from 2021, so 3 years ago. And this is a very detailed survey targeting small and medium enterprises and their activities related to circular economy and also the main barriers perceived. Well, it's a cross-section data set, so we have data only for 2021, so we cannot follow these firms for different years. But on the contrary, we have, let's say, a very detailed information. Then we have several sources that we use in order to identify drivers and barriers. Like we are using regional data from Eurostat, we are using regional innovation scoreboard data, and we are also using the European quality of governance data. This data is about quality of public institutions, quality of government as perceived by citizens, also in terms of corruption. Different is a composite measure about the quality of public institutions. As we have 14,000 interviews with managers of these small and medium enterprises from the 27 member states. And specifically what do we have is information about their activities in these firms, about several, let's say, actions that are quite connected to this idea, this general idea of circular economy. We have information about their activities in terms of water reduction, energy reduction, waste reduction, material reduction, switch to suppliers of greener materials, whether they use or not renewable energies, the sale of scrap to other firms, recycle activities, and design of products. In order to simplify these 9 actions, we have grouped them into 3 measures: reduce, recycle, and redesign. The ones of redesign are very important because normally or traditionally, the most of focus has been on recycle. But by redesigning products and production processes, we may, let's say, obtain this reduction in energy, in materials, and we may also favor these recycle activities by just redesigning the way in which we produce them. So we have, I think, a quite complete and diverse approach to all these types of circular actions with these 3 measures without going into the detail of the 9 that we could get from this survey. And in order to try to understand what favors, what difficulties the implementation of these circular economy actions. We have several variables like employment in knowledge-intensive activities. We have R&D activities carried out both by public and private institutions. We have cooperation in terms of innovation. We have process innovation activities. We have variable measuring the temperature in order to try to account whether that plays a role or not. Also about data about the digital skills of the individuals, data about the government quality, and a dummy variable trying to identify whether there is some kind of north-south divide in terms of implementation of these measures. Well, in terms of the method we are using here, we are using as a baseline and standard, typical, not complicated, OLS regression, and then we estimate a geographically weighted regression. The main advantage that we get in using a GWR, a geographical weighted regression, is that this method allows the spatial heterogeneity. This is especially recommended when, as we have in this data set, we have very different, very heterogeneous spatial units like a European regions. Because by using the GWR, what do we get is that as many coefficients, as many betas as the spatial units. And that's quite important because that implies that the same factor, the same regional characteristics may have a different effect in different areas. So, and this is something which could be of interest when we have a geographical context like the one we have in this paper, in which the spatial units are very, very different, not only in terms of size, but also in economic structures, in development levels, and in policy priorities. So also, in addition to this, let's say, heterogeneity, using GWR also allows us to better identify local patterns that using a global measure could be hidden in a single coefficient, and also to better handle spatial autocorrelation. So at the end, what do we have is that we have our measure of circular economy is a location quotient that we calculate in this case as a ratio between we have the enterprises, the firms implementing a given action in a given region related to total firms in that region, and then that divided by the total number of firms implementing that action related to the total number of firms in our survey. By this way, we get, let's say, three location quotients for each specific location, specific circular economy measure, one for reduce, one for recycle, and one for redesign. And then in addition to that, we have an overall measure of circular economy, taking into account all these different specific circular economy activities. Just in order to get an overall idea about let's say our main results, here you have the spatial distribution of this dependent variable, and if I had to summarize this picture in terms of which is the current situation according to the survey and according to our measure of circular economy, which is the current situation in terms of implementation of circular economy measures at regional level, I would say there is an important regional heterogeneity. So if you look at this map, it seems clear that we have a lot of contrast, a lot of heterogeneity. At the same time that we have that national borders matter. So looking at this map, it's possible to see the borders of many countries, which implies that, okay, although there is some kind of heterogeneity inside countries, also national regulation, national policies, national structures play a role, and we have to take them into account. And the final consideration we could identify here is that it seems that there is not a clear and direct connection between GDP, between development level, between income level, and circular economy actions, because we cannot see a situation, a typical, let's say, a typical core periphery situation in which we have, let's say, rich northern regions implementing a lot of measures and southern poorer regions not working in the same direction. Here we have a lot of, let's say, very different cores of circularity. We have, for instance, the case of Sweden is very clear, the case of some regions of Spain, not all of them, and most of Belgium and the Netherlands. Also, that's an examples of core areas in terms of implementation of circular economy measures. This is for the whole measure of circular economy. If we go to the different measures, the one about reduce, recycle, and redesign, well, my comment would be pretty much the same in terms of this lack of connection between development levels and circular economy, this heterogeneous regional level, and this importance of national borders. But if we compare the three measures, obviously we have some similarities across them, but the picture is different. So it means that, well, circular economy is something very complex. It's not only about recycling, it's much more than that. And then that implies that not all countries, not all regions are going into the same direction for all these different measures. So we may obtain very different results depending on the particular measure. If we carry out, let's say, an initial simple OLS regression here we have the four measures of circular economy, the one about the overall one about circular economy in general terms, and then the one about reduce, recycle, and redesign. We have grouped the determinants into four vectors in order to better understand the role. The first is about institutional characteristics. The second is about socioeconomic and organizational characteristics. The third one is about environmental characteristics, and the fourth one is about technological characteristics and supply chain. If we check these results and we try to identify them in terms of drivers in green and barriers in red, it seems that, well, there are some characteristics mainly acting as a barrier, like cooperation for innovation activities, R&D carried out by private firms, digital skills are not self-divide, and also other characteristics that may be quite surprising, but I will try to explain that later on, that may act as a barriers, like employment in knowledge-intensive services or like process innovation activities. This is the first approach we get, or we have, if we carry out this OLS regression. Then if we move to the GWR approach, here, as I said before, we have as many beta coefficients as observations. So I'm not discussing all of them, but just we have here is that we have in this table we have the minimum values, the maximum values, and a median value for each one of these variables, and then a non-stationarity test. This non-stationarity test refers to the spatial variability of the interrelation between the dependent variables and the independent variables. And the idea is that if this non-stationarity test is positive, it means that the effect of an independent variable on the dependent variable changes across one location to another. So the effect is not the same. And that it's very important, because if we have both positive and negative effects, it's important to control for that rather than to look only at the median value. In this sense, here I have tried to put exactly the same results, but on a more simple, on a more clear way. And what do we have here is that for each specification and for each variable, in which cases one's in green, the green cells, the non-stationarity test was significant. And what we have is that for most of variables and for most of specifications, the non-stationarity test is significant, which implies that we are, for instance, the effect of process innovation or the effect of digital skill changes across locations. So we cannot say that, okay, digital skills are going to influence, to determine circular economy actions in the same direction in all areas. And that's very important when we think in terms of public policies, because if the effects are different, then we need to tailor these policies at a regional level in order to account for these specificities. Because if we don't do that, we may give, let's say, a wrong policy tool to some regions if we try to apply then the results of many other regions. So as we have plenty of results here, let me try to just, as a matter of example, to show you some examples about some determinants that have been identified in this original OLS regression as drivers, and some determinants that have been identified as barriers, just a couple of them. For instance, in terms of determinants acting as drivers, R&D carried out by private institutions, by firms. Well, do we have that? Well, it's here we have the coefficient for the betas, and the results are very, very different across different areas, different regions in this case, and different in terms that in some of them the effect is negative, in some of them the effect is positive. So we have, let's say, a lack of a clear regional pattern in view of this important heterogeneity, and this is how the whole measure of circular economy. If we look at the specific measures, the idea is, in general terms, pretty much the same. Different effects across different regions. So the idea is that, well, to provide policy suggestions, the same policy receipt for all regions perhaps is not a good idea. Also, as an example, another regional characteristic that may act as a driver, like digital skills, here for the overall definition of circular economy, the same idea, some positive effect in some areas, some negative effect in many others. As for the specific measures of circular economy, again, the same idea, different effects, and also at country level. So we have very heterogeneous effects inside as for the regions of the same country. And if we look on a couple of characteristics identified as barriers, like for instance process innovation, is exactly the same idea, both positive and negative effects here for the overall measure. As for the particular measures, again, also very heterogeneous effects according to the regions, and also for a variable like employment in knowledge intensive services, again, heterogeneity, positive, negative effects for the overall measure, and then exactly the same from the specific measures. So at the end, what to conclude about that? Well, what to conclude is that there is a huge spatial in this case regional heterogeneity that well highlights the need for a very spatially desegregated approach when analyzing both circular economy actions and their determinants. So that requires to, let's say, to use spatial disaggregated data, even if it's also true that there is a national dimension that has to be considered, because there is a national dimension in which some regulations are implemented, some policies are implemented, and that obviously has an overall effect over the decisions of firms in terms of implementing this kind of circular economy strategies. But this national dimension is not enough. We need to go a little bit further and to take into account the regional dimensions. When considering different types of actions, it seems that there are our specifications explain mainly reduce and recycle, but redesign seem to be driven by different processes. And that could be explained by, in fact, by EU priorities in terms of circular economy measures, because between 2015 and 2018, more or less, EU policy priorities were mainly on waste and on resources. But from 2018, so since more or less 6 years ago, priorities are also on redesign, which implies that, well, perhaps what explain firms' implementation of redesign actions is not exactly the same that what explains the implementation of strictly recycle activities. And also an important finding that surprised us a lot is that, well, that it seems that high-tech activities and circular economy actions, it seems that they are not moving together in the same direction, because some of them act as drivers, private investment in R&D, cooperation, digital skills, but at the same time, some of them act as barriers, like employment in knowledge intensive services or process innovation. That was very surprising for us, but well, this is the second time I present this paper. The first time I presented it, it was in a workshop in Paris, and I received a very interesting comment there, because I was told there that this result fitted perfectly with the French case, because in I had no idea about that. I mean, we haven't thought about that, but they told us that in France, let's say the implementation of circular economy measures is not linked to technology. It's linked mainly to social attitudes. It's linked to NGOs trying to push firms in this direction. So overall, the idea is that this is not about, obviously, you need the technology in order to implement some actions, but this is not something driven only by technology. Technology, you could understand that as a necessary condition, but not the definitive condition in this sense. And well, as for policy implications that we may obtain from our result, well, first one is about these regional asymmetries, and then the need for very tailored regional policies in terms of circular economy, aiming to consider, to take into account all the regional specificities. Then some requirements. Obviously, investing in digital human capital is needed. Yes, it's needed. But this is not, let's say, a final condition. We need that in order to implement some technical solutions, but only with that we are not going to go circular. And then this result that showed that higher employment in knowledge-intensive activities and may not be related with the stronger implementation of circular economy actions. That may suggest some kind of disconnection between the traditional innovation models and requirements of circular economy actions. And again, the same idea that circular economy is not only about technology. It is about technology, but not only. And also, well, as in terms of policy implications, it is obvious idea that lack of government support is a major barrier for the implementation of these activities. Well, in terms of limitations of this paper, and I'm finishing here. Our results may not be fully capturing total performance of circular economy practices, because, well, at the end, our data source is a very limited sample of some small and medium enterprises answering this Eurobarometer survey. So that may imply that some actors are not being considered, as we are using as our only source of circularity. These firms, the number is quite high, but this is only a sample. These firms answering this survey. Then the second limitation is that we are carrying out a very particular measure of circular economy action. So we are, since the 9 actions identified in the survey, we have built up a typology of 3 circular economy actions, but obviously there are many others not included here. Also, we have a potential size bias when using location quotient, but this is something that it's there. And then when this data is from a single year. It's from 2021. So, well, perhaps, and obviously this is something which is changing very, very fast. Okay, so that would be much better if we could control for the temporal evolution of these activities, but we can't, because this data is referred to a single year. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. As you have noticed, I have focused on the contextualization of this circular economy idea and definition, and trying to explain why it is important and why current socioeconomic transformations matter, and why these current socioeconomic transformations make difficult to implement this kind of measures.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this really amazing and really interesting talk.